So I'll take a second and kind of channel my inner Rob Ritchie with a good stat that I had to look up for today's teaching. So studies estimate that the average person makes roughly 35,000 decisions per day, including small choices like what we're going to eat, breakfast, large decisions like where to work or where to live. These equate to roughly 2,000 decisions made per hour, or one decision every 2 seconds. So as part of kind of this next portion of teaching, Rod got together with me and said, hey, I want to kind of make this brief transition. There are so many passages throughout Scripture that are just taken out of context and that are wildly used. People that misinterpret them, they misquote them, and oftentimes they use those as sort of like their main arguments when having discussions. And so we wanted to get into some of those. And so today I want to tackle probably one of the biggest ones, and that is in Matthew 7. So if you guys want to catch up and turn to your Bibles in Matthew 7, that's where we'll spend our time today. So do not judge, or you too will be judged. So do not judge. How many people in here have been judged? I might need to say that again because not everybody's hands raised. So I'm pretty sure, yeah. My kids are on their phones apparently. So how many people have been judged? Yeah. And let's be honest now, how many people have judged others? Right? I mean, it's natural. Again, we're making several decisions per day. And so this can be a really, oftentimes, critical part. And so Jesus steps into this and gives us exactly the guidance that we need when we're thinking about our judgments. But it's funny how twisted this gets for folks, for both believers and non-believers. And so I really want to get into more of the relational side of this perceived judgment, the judgment that we experience and the judgment that others have towards us. And even those that we make towards others, and really think about this one-on-one relationship that we're all striving for. And so we, of course, have approached folks when we see them making the wrong decisions, or in our mind, it's the wrong decision. And we want to step alongside them and begin to have a conversation with them and kind of broach the subject. And you will oftentimes hear, you have no right to judge me. Who are you to judge me? You're so righteous. Oh, of course, you're churchy, so you're going to judge me. You think you're God now, right? So you, of course, can judge me. And then they'll always throw this one, right? This is the big zinger, how they can step away. They'll all go like, well, wait a minute. Didn't Jesus say, don't judge me, or you're going to get judged? So how dare you judge me? And so we see this argument that plays out, and people misquoting this portion of Scripture. And so what Rod and I really want to do as we look at these is really analyze what the context of the Scripture truly means. Because yes, those are the plain words. Do not judge, lest thee be judged, or do not judge, or you too will be judged. Those are the words that were spoken. But we have to really look at the literary context, or sometimes we have to visit the point in history in which it was made, who Jesus was talking to, the time in which he was talking, and what he's actually trying to convey. And this will all be important as we start to get into kind of this next month or this next little mini-series where Rod and I will be teaching again on these. So it was funny, some people knew I was going to be talking about this, and so of course they brought in some of the things that have happened either in their own lives or good examples and so on. And so Kina, would you mind sharing what was the most recent one?
I was over here in a classroom. I have to film stuff to get put into videos throughout the year, etc. And so I'm in a classroom, and they're challenged by the teacher to say something they know to be true about God. And one of the girls says, God doesn't judge anyone. And I'm like, whoa, time out. Yes, he does. You're kidding. He is justice. That is why we can trust him. I probably shouldn't have spoken up, but I was just like, whoa, that
They had to bring security in.
No, you absolutely have to
He
step
is the only one who can do it correctly.
And we absolutely have to step into that. And we'll learn through our study today why that's important and that we are called to step in. We are are called to do exactly that. So yes, judging does take place, and there's an appropriate way to do that, but we'll get into that. And then Rod, you were sharing one too, most recently about the Pope, right?
Yeah, I was fascinated, as they're highlighting the Pope's life, the people's Pope, as they say, and the media was really highlighting his perspective on the homosexual community and priests being allowed to bless same-sex marriages and stuff like that. So they were asking him about that, and his comment to that was, well, who am I to judge? Who am I to judge? This is the Pope, over 1.3 billion Catholics. Who am I to judge these things? And it's kind of like, whoa, wait a second.
Yeah, and we all do. As I was preparing for this, Christina and I were standing in the kitchen the other day, and I was like, man, it's getting nice outside, so we've got our windows open and so on. And our backyard leads right into Cole Road. And we've got a pretty steep hill, and there's somewhat of an intersection that kind of happens here because it's kind of like a blind intersection as you go up the hill there. And so, man, I'm hearing motorcycles just revving their engines and racing up the hill. I'm hearing cars and big diesel trucks just getting on it, and the turbos of other cars, and then some of the little smaller, foreign cars or whatever, and their little fart exhausts. I'm hearing those. And I'm just like, I'm trying to concentrate on what I'm doing, but I'm hearing all this. I'm like, my goodness, right? But I'm making all these like judgments in my head of like who that person is getting on their accelerator and who's honking that horn and how dare they honk that horn and stuff. And then sometimes I have to be reminded of just how good of a driver I really am. I'm not, right? And so there's often times that I actually get judged in the car pretty routinely, right, Christina? So yeah. So we have that. So again, we all make those. But I'm kind of curious, does anybody feel comfortable, like, anybody have maybe an example of a time that they have been judged, or maybe that they've tried to step in with somebody and they've given that example where they're trying to maybe bring guidance or correct someone's behavior or a decision that someone else has made, and they've gotten that response of like, you don't have a right to judge me. Does anybody have anything they want to share? No? No, that's fair, because it's hard. It's very hard. And we'll get into kind of more of like that empathy and that sensitivity that is necessary for that. But yeah, oftentimes some of these scenarios, they're hard and they're messy. So let's get into more of like, so what did Jesus actually say as we look at the Matthew passage? And so, Matthew, if you want to go ahead and go. So we've got, obviously at Matthew 7, do not judge so that you will not be judged. And so this will be kind of our primary focal point. But he also says things like this. If your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault. He says that in Matthew 18. And in Luke 17, he says, if your brother sins, rebuke him. So it feels like there's this contrary element that's happening. It's saying, don't judge, but then again, you're saying to judge. So which one really is it? How do we go about confronting sin? So this is where the context comes in and becomes key. And so Matt, if you want to advance. This right here is a beautiful picture. It's on roughly where we believe the Sermon on the Mount took place. And so as Matthew is sharing this verse that we're studying today, this is where we believe, not this piece of grass here specifically, but this area over the Sea of Galilee is where it would have taken place. And so going from Matthew 5 to 7, there's going to be this one cohesive teaching that we all know as the Sermon on the Mount. Mm-hmm. And so at Matthew 5, it begins with, now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came after him. And this is important because, again, context is key. He is now talking very specifically to those who followed him. And so who followed him? His disciples, right? So it's going to be him and his disciples that he's sitting down with. And a little bit later on in Matthew 5, go ahead, Nettie. So we have this, right? So Jesus saw the crowds, and to the next one, Matthew 5:20, he's going to give this statement here. For I say to you that unless your righteousness far surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter to the kingdom of heaven. And so Jesus, again, he's not speaking to the crowd, he's speaking to his disciples. Jesus is teaching about the kingdom of life and the life that reflects the heart of God. And he's imparting that onto his disciples. And so he's really shifting now to the relationship that we have with others. How do we treat others? How are we going to judge others? How do we truly discern? And so he uses that. So unless your righteousness surpasses all of the Pharisees, and he'll continue on. And so the structure of the sermon really has this contrast, this movement from being kind of what conventional righteousness was of the day, that of the law, of the scribes, and of the Pharisee, and kind of what they knew, the letter of the law. And you would have these religious leaders that would come and they would enforce their law and really put down these harsh judgments on folks. And we actually see that throughout Jesus' life as Pharisees come to test him and so on. We've got a really good example that we'll go over a little bit. So he's making this grand transition, right? He wants to get into this more deeper righteousness, this deeper righteousness that comes directly from God. And he's going to begin to deliver this as he addresses the everyday areas that we all struggle with. The areas of anger, of lust, of the oaths we make. He's even going to go over fasting and prayer. He's going to go through all of these beatitudes that will be. And so he shows, again, this religious and vicious cycle that is kind of commonplace in today's, and he's trying to transform it and really change not only the hearts of his disciples, but getting their minds to be on par with what he is trying to convey to them. And so again, the misunderstood verse of judge not is one of the most quoted and misquoted verses in the Bible. People often take it to mean, don't ever tell me that something is wrong with me. You don't have a right, right? And it's basically a defense mechanism that we try to put up this barrier between the relationships that we have with other people. Because the honest truth of it is, we know exactly what we're doing that's wrong. We know the decisions that we have made. And even if some of those are maybe not as apparent in our everyday consciousness, there is this sort of fight or struggle that we have. And so yeah, we put up this barrier. And you can't judge me, right? Don't step on my side of the wall. You have no idea, you have no right. So what we're really looking at is really this humble judgment that we want to talk about, right? So again, going back to that first verse, do not judge so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. So what is this really meaning? Well, we got to really understand what it means when he's saying judge. What does that really mean? So Matt, if you'll advance for me, keep going all the way to the Greek. Right here. I love Greek words. We'll get into this. So this word, krino, again, it means to judge, to decide, or to discern. And so for us, it is necessary in life for us to make decisions. We make many of them, one every 2 seconds, right? There's these evaluations that are made, this discernment that happens. There's even some of those, kind of like those gut decisions that we make. And oftentimes we'll use kind of the common language of like, I made a judgment call, right? Christina sends me to the store and she's like, I need you to pick up some hamburger. Okay, great. So I go and I'm gonna go pick it. Ooh, do I get this hamburger or this hamburger? Yeah, right? Like there's so many choices that I need to make. I need to make a decision. And I call her, and of course she's not answering her phone that I pay every month for, but she's down in the laundry. Yeah, she's actually down in the laundry room doing laundry, right? Doing everything else for our house. So she's not answering. So I have to make a gut decision, right? I have to decide something quickly. And then there's like to pass judgment or condemn. And this is where I think people get it twisted, right? There's a very difference between a decision and a discernment that's being made, but then there's also this weight that comes when we pass judgment or we condemn someone. And so in that, this condemnation, that's where people get it reversed. They begin to put themselves in the place of God, and they're making a decision about someone and actually causing some sort of judgment, some sort of penalty. They begin to think, hey, I'm no longer going to talk to this person because, man, I know that they do drugs, and so I want nothing to do with them. I'm never going to talk to that person again. I'm going to devalue them completely. I have made this judgment, this condemnation on them as, they're a druggie, or, they have gambling addictions. I don't want no part of it, so I'm going to completely, this person is not a good person anymore. And so they begin to make this judgment on them. Dallas Willard, he has this really great book, and there's a quote that when we condemn others, we communicate that they are bad and possibly irredeemable way. And so this is what we're really focusing on when we think of condemnation. So what is Jesus not saying? I kind of alluded to this. He is not saying we should ignore sin. That is not what he's saying at all. He's also not saying this in Matthew 18 when he says, now, if your brother sins, go and show him his faults in private. And I'll even continue like ways to handle that and taking them before church or taking other witnesses and so on. But basically, again, they're not saying avoid. They are saying, now, if your brother sins, go and show him his faults. In John, it says, do not judge by the outward appearance, but judge with a righteous judgment. Again, this righteous judgment, the judgment that would come from heaven. That is how we are called to judge. And so as we continue with, we don't be quick and condemn others without examining your own heart. And that's where we get into kind of the fun part of this. The way that we treat others is a measure of how we want to be treated, right? Kind of that golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated, right? So the principle here is that a harsh, critical spirit invites the same scrutiny from God and others, but a gracious and humble approach truly fosters mercy. So what is this? There's this human double standard that we often deal with, right? And this is where we really have to look at the conviction within our own hearts. It's this common pattern or this other vicious cycle that says, if you succeed, well, that's just because you're lucky. But if I succeed, it's because I work hard. I'm deserving of that. If you fail, well, that's because you're irresponsible. You deserve to fail. But if I fail, I just have bad luck. It's not my fault that I failed. There's other circumstances that played into that. And so we all go through this battle time in and time and again as we're making, again, these decisions, as we're starting to create this judgment. And so we really grapple with that. And so with this, we have to know, am I being too quick to criticize? And do I give others the benefit of the doubt?
I got a question.
Yeah.
When he says if your brother is sinning, go talk to him about it. Do you think that he's talking about Christian brothers or brotherhood as a whole?
Well, I think it's, again, we're getting really relational here. So yeah, I believe it's more, your Christian brother, right? It's someone you can step into and begin to talk about sin. But I think also as followers ourselves, I think, yes, it's also equally important to go and talk with other folks and talk about sin and stuff. But there's definitely a bigger divide, right? There's a bigger gap that you have to kind of a chasm there that you have to kind of go. So that's why when we really talk about how do we go about approaching this and the sensitivity in which we're going to do that. But so I think it's yes, but more applicably when you continue to read the verses, so context is key. It does speak more to the followers because it's also going to say bring other witnesses with you, right? And then it also leans in, and if they're still not listening, bring it to the church and let the church begin. And if that person still falls away, as fortunate as you kind of have to let that somewhat go, but there's this exposure that happens. So to your answer, yes, it's more brothers, but I don't want that to say for all of us that we shouldn't step into the lives of other people. Because who knows if that's that divine opportunity for you to step into somebody and talk about sin and get them exposed to God and bring them. Again, it's a further distance to come, but yeah. That makes sense? Yeah, cool. Yeah, if you want to go back and read through that verse, it kind of walks step by step. First, approach them privately, like at night, right away. Like, let's go talk about this. And then if they don't, then follow that up by bringing other brothers with you that can come and witness to them at the same time. And if that still doesn't work, then let's all bring that to the church and let the church body continue to try to work through this healing with this individual. So, yeah, great question. So we're going to go now into more of this self-examination, right? And like I said, the kind of the funny pieces that they get here. So 3, 4, and 5 of Matthew. So again, chapter 7. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to a brother, let me take the speck out of your eye and look the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First thing, take the log out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. It was really funny. We were watching The Chosen with the young ladies that come to our house, and it was one of the scene where they're celebrating Shabbat, and Mary has this invitation with folks to her house, and Jesus shows up, And there's always the one guy at the party who's a little more outspoken and vocal, and probably says the things you're not supposed to say. And as Jesus is kind of introduced, right, they don't really recognize him as a Messiah or anything just yet, but they just say, Jesus of Nazareth. And the one guy, Barnabas, speaks up and goes, oh, I guess something good can come out of Nazareth, right? We've kind of heard that. And obviously this is a fictional story, it's kind of part of the telling, but it just shows in the moment this funny exchange that happens. And Jesus just immediately, without even saying anything, just kind of winks at him like, okay, yeah, like I get the joke. And you kind of see the smirk on his face, and he totally acknowledges what Barnabas is saying here. And I bring that up because there's a certain amount of levity. And what happened is one of the young ladies was just like, man, I really picked up on that little joke that was made and just how Jesus' reaction was in that moment. And just the fact that, like, yeah, everybody kind of puts Jesus on such a significant pedestal where he's always more like looking down or so stiff and proper and righteous and so on that we don't take into effect of what he was like in the flesh, where he was like the rest of us and with the rest of us. And so he acknowledges this funny, humorous moment. And so when we actually look into Scripture, we actually have some evidence of this, humor that he actually applies. And he's doing it right here for his disciples when he's making this reference to the speck in one person's eye and the log in another person's eye. And so, Maddie, we advance. So we talked about this. So when we look at speck was really kind of look at like a piece of chaff or like a little twig or something kind of really insignificant, especially when you compare it to what he says, a plank or a beam or a log. We're talking about one of these. And actually, when you look at some of the translation for this beam or this log in construction back in first century, it would have been something that would have sustained a structure. It would have been pretty significant, right? So we're not just talking about just like a log that we would go cut or something that could just barely fit. I mean, we're talking about something significant, massive, something meant to really hold structures up. There would be no way you could actually get around. And so he's using this as levity, right? Like we've all seen, Marx Brothers or something like that, where somebody picks up a ladder and as he goes to spin with the ladder, right, he's hitting the other Three Stooges, kind of knocking each other back and forth. This is his moment where he's saying this, like, how could somebody possibly focus on anything small as this little twig when they've got this giant beam that is hanging from them? It would be really hard. I mean, imagine going to the optometrist and he's got this giant beam hanging from his head, and he's like, okay, which one's better, 1 or 2? 1 or 2? And it's just like, how? What? Like, I don't know how we're supposed to do this. Right? So, Maddie, continue on for me. So again, or how can you say that your brother, let me take that speck out of your eye, and look, the log is in your own eye. And so there's this great humorous, kind of basically cartoonish type analogy that he's really making here. And so we find humor there, but I also want to think about this. How appropriate for the son of a carpenter to really use these little pieces of wood. But that's not to say the insignificance of the two, right? Having a beam or something in your eye, back then, you think of what modern medicine would have been at the time versus what it is now. Any type of eye surgery or anything done on a person's eye, like, oftentimes it was going to relate to significant blindness. Like, that was just the reality. And so now I start to think about this just for my own sake, and it's not for the Scripture, but I start to think of how many of us have had a splinter. Yeah, they hurt, right? They really hurt. And when you go to try to remove that, I will tell you right now, Peyton, I love you to death, but if that little guy had a splinter in his hand, and his mom or I wanted to go and try to help him, oh my goodness, it'd be like, no, like leave it alone, don't touch it, leave it alone, please don't, right? And so I really think of like what that sensitivity would have been like of just having that. Now imagine you've got this significant wood beam structure that you're having to carry the weight of that. And so I start to think, okay, now as I think of other people, and I think of like what that means when we're trying to approach this in a righteous way with kind of the sense of humility of understanding what it feels like to carry this significant beam and what that would have meant. And even knowing even the slightest little splinter, just how bad that feels. And so as we're stepping in with our brothers and we're talking to them about their decisions, the way that they're living their life, and we want to talk to them about their sin. How are we approaching that? How do I approach my son, who I know is extremely sensitive, and he's got that? Like, what's that level of care, the empathy? Like, how am I trying to relate to him to allow him to let me care for him? So again, going back to this specifically though, Jesus uses humor and a grand exaggeration to make his point, and he's focusing on people, the small issues versus someone else's life, while they're ignoring the major issue in their own. And so again, there's this intentional comic imagery that's being used. And so the point here, right, again, I want to use that Dallas Willard example, is like when we condemn another, we really communicate that he or she is in some way deeply, irrevocably, they are just bad. They are a bad person and to be rejected. But here, right, where it explains that condemnation is not just saying something is wrong and writing it off as, but essentially they're getting to this, you are bad and beyond repair. And that's what we tend to do when we make these judgments. And so we're being encouraged not to do that, right? This is not what Jesus is trying to convey when he talks about judgment. And the kind of condemnation that we were talking about here, though, this is the kind of condemnation that kills love. Mm-hmm. I often tell the young group that, Jesus and the examples that we have, Jesus and God does not choose to love you. He's never made a choice to love you versus you versus you. We know Jesus to be love. He is the example of love. We get this awesome opportunity as believers to make that choice to love him back and to love others. That is a conscious choice that we are allowed to make, that free will that we talk about. But for Jesus and for God, that's not the way. So as we're talking about what God's heart is, what Jesus is trying to convey here, it is this love that just exists. It's not a conscious choice. So again, he emphasizes through this that we do not condemn, and so is the kingdom of life. We are called to do unto others as we want done unto them. We recognize wrong without withdrawing love or hope from that individual or that situation. You keep someone until you have dealt with their issues. You keep that frame of mind until that issue is dealt with. And that's what we're being asked to do. Now let's get into this next part, the hypocrite. So this is pretty fun too, right? Because we're actually going to see in one of the few times in the Bible where we actually have an exchange of words. Jesus is going to radically change at this moment in time the difference that people actually know the word hypocrite to be. Because up until this point, to be a hypocrite, Maddie, sorry, will you go to the next one? Hypocrite, right? Another Greek word, right? This was for one who answers as an interpreter. It's for an actor. So this is what people at that time would have known. So again, context is key. So back then, a hypocrite was somebody that would put on a mask and put on a play and be somebody other than themselves. He's going to radically change it. He's going to take it from kind of this positive that everybody would know. Like you would naturally go up to somebody and be like, hey, I saw your play. You're an amazing hypocrite. That's how they would talk, right? Man, that group of hypocrites. So bravo, right? That's the way they would look at it. Jesus is now going to take that and put this into somewhat of a negative and put it to what we know today. And that's why it's humorous for us in this moment, but he's going to change it for us. And he's going to make this more of, again, don't hide behind your mask. Don't pretend to be something that you're not and not truly see it for the way that God or the way that Jesus sees these types of situations. So there's a great example of this. Again, Matthew 23:27. Jesus rebukes, right? And so it's actually here, sorry. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and are unclean. Again, he starts to use this word, this hypocrite, and he radically changes what the actual meaning is for folks, because that's the way it is. Remember, he's making this distinction with his disciples to go from what was sort of conventional knowledge and righteousness to what is truly the heart of God, what he really wants his disciples, how he wants them to act and behave and what to understand. And so he's beginning to change this right now for them. of how we should make these approaches when we think about judgment and now how we even view hypocrites, right? And so first we have to make sure we keep this order, right? We need to remove the log from our own eye, and that way we can clearly see to help others. And so you can help others with their struggles, but only after addressing what is wrong with you, what sins you've committed. Because sometimes people know us better than we know ourselves. Sometimes people know us a little more personally than we would care to admit, and that's really easy. Aaron, don't talk to me about my drug abuse. Like, I've seen you take drugs. Just for the record, I've never taken a drug in my life, but as the example would go, right? Or Aaron, don't talk to me about stealing. I know that you've stolen things when you were a kid, right? You shoplifted yourself. Don't talk to me about that. Or don't correct me. You don't have a right to do that. How much easier is it to be like, yeah, I did steal something, and here's the consequence that I went through. And the only way I got over that is when I hit my knees and I prayed and I really gave that to the Lord. I'm telling you, man, that just struggled and it hurt me. But I want to talk to you about that because I want you to try to avoid that. And guess what? I had to do that by myself. Let's do this together. Let me help you together, right? It's a totally different shift. It's all about love. It's not about me judging them and the consequences. It's really having me step in with them. And so I would encourage you to do the same thing. And so how do we do this? Well, we sit with Jesus in our own condemnation. So picture yourself, the things that you've had in your life, the sins that you've had, maybe you've done this, maybe you're struggling with one right now, and you're just fearful of what that looks like. I encourage you, hit your knees, or envision just sitting at the table and being like, Jesus, this is what I have done, this is what I'm dealing with, this is my struggle, here is my giant log, here it is. Now think, how would he respond to that? Would he cast you away? Be like, sorry, that's too much. Don't love you anymore. Good luck with that. Can you actually carry that off the table? We don't need that anymore. No, he would sit there and be like, I got this. Now let's really talk about how I love you and what this really means and how I can heal you from this, how I can save you from this. That's the exact approach he wants us to take. Look through that exact same lens. Remove the masks, remove the hypocrisy, and get right into the moment. And we've actually seen this actually play out, right? What is this model? And so, Maddie, if we can advance, we'll stay right here. John 8. Everybody knows this, right? This is when the Pharisees are like, haha, we're going to catch him. We've got a great example. We've kept this woman in captivity. We know that she's been an adulterous woman. We're going to see how Jesus responds to this. And so they're going to throw her out in front of him in the court. They're going to try to paint him in this corner. And they're going to basically say, how would you deal with this? Like, we should stone this woman. Or if you don't agree that we should stone her, then what are you really saying, right? They want to catch him in this. But what's really interesting here is that before all of this, what do we see Jesus actually visually doing? Do you guys remember? Drawing with his finger in the dirt. And so when we think about, again, this righteous law that we're trying to make this shift from, the way the Pharisees and the scribes and so on, you know, they're the ones that are wearing kind of this hypocrisy among them. They've got these beautiful robes, and they stand up nice and tall, and they preach the law, and they give their condemnation and stuff. But here's Jesus, who's got this whole situation unfolding in front of him, and he's been in the dirt. And some people kind of debate, what was he doing? Was he writing out the names of the mistresses that each one of them had, or was he writing out their sins beyond that? You know, what was he doing? But there's a great friend of ours. He actually came for that teaching because I taught on this about a year ago. His name is Brian Weaver. We do sports with him and so on. And Brian brought me aside and he goes, you know, the visual image of that's pretty impressive because, again, we've got this tall stature of all these Pharisees that are surrounding Jesus and placing him in this really uncomfortable situation. And Jesus doesn't do any of that to like rise above it all like you would expect any person to be. But he's down. He's at the lowest level of anybody there. The woman, the Pharisees, he is the lowest, providing this example before they finally end up exiting, right? He basically says, who among you without sin, go ahead, cast the first stone. And then eventually we start to see them exiting, and that's when he moves on and, you know, straightens up, and Jesus says to her, woman, where are they? Where'd all these guys go? Did no one condemn you? And Madeline, the next one. And she said, no one, Lord. And Jesus said, I don't condemn you either. So go, and from now on, do not sin any longer. Go and sin no more. This is the type of judgment. He doesn't ignore the sin that's taken place. Right? It's pointed out, it's very well known. He understands the sin, but he's also not passing a condemnation type judgment. He basically just says, go and sin no more. And that's the opportunity we have when we see these judgments taking place. We have that opportunity to just recognize the sin and speak to the sin and speak truth into individuals and provide them hope and give them that same type that we would want if we placed our sin on the table before Jesus and what he would do for us. And he would simply just say, I've got it, I understand it, but go and sin no more. And that is what he's asking us to do. So then as we move on, like that's the biggest piece. But we also have this, right? And this is somewhat of a warning too as we go into 6 as he sort of wraps this up. But he does bring this up. Do not give what is holy to dogs, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, or they will be trampled under their feet and turn and try to tear you down. And there are those folks that we do. There are those brothers that will go and seek and try to step in and explain their sin. There is this warning. There are some of those where, hey, we need to also exercise a grace that is just patience. That person may not be prepared to talk about that just yet. It may not be the right time. And we have to be okay from backing away from the table and providing that distance, giving them that opportunity. It will come around again, I'm sure. There will be an opportunity. There will be a place and a time where that will be met. And maybe not even by you. So sometimes it's hard to really continue just to want to just get in there and keep trying to expose and keep kind of trying to dig at that splinter that just will not come out, right? We need to understand that there are times where, hey, it's not worthy of it. And this is for you. So this is Jesus' warning to his disciples as well. There are those times, and that is okay. So as we sort of wrap this up, again, judge yourself before you judge others. Be humble, not hypocritical. Use discernment. And at the end of the day, share truth. The big idea is that Jesus calls us to a life of humble self-awareness and wise discernment, not self-righteous condemnation. So as you have an opportunity, I would encourage you, what are some of those areas that you're tempted to judge others harshly? Have you asked God recently to show you the log that is in your own eye? Maybe it's the one that you're unaware of. Is there someone that you need to approach and love? Or someone that you need to stop confronting now? And so the final challenge here for all of us is let's sit with Jesus. Let him heal our projections, because oftentimes these judgments are our projections that we project onto other people. And then over time, we can become the kind of person that we're being asked to be, one that does confront sin, or one that does it without condemning others. Amen?
Amen.
Thanks, guys. Love you.